start that recording now. Bearing in mind that if you don't want your real name, you could put my name or any other name if you'd rather be anonymous here, or if you'd rather have your camera off since we're recording it, then obviously that's absolutely fine. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever you are. It's so exciting to have representation from so many different countries as we look around the screen now, as we've looked down the booking list and so on. That's really great. So thank you for joining us. If you can keep your yourself muted, that would be really helpful because we are expecting quite a few people, and it'd be tricky if you didn't stay muted. However, we really want you to participate in this session, and so we're going to use Mentimeter for that. So you should be able to see there on the screen now. If you haven't used that before, it's really easy. So if you go to the website menti.com, you should be able to see it at the top of the screen here. You can do this on a mobile phone or on a different window of your device. Go to menti.com and type in this number at the top. When you go on the website, it'll ask for you to type in a code. This is the code here at the top, 57224712. And this will mean that you can type in various contributions and thoughts as we go through our discussion. So I do hope you'll be able to join with that. And the first question is, where are you from? So feel free to type into that, and then we will know that people have successfully logged into that. So as I say, you go to menti.com and type that code at the top. And just while you're all saying where you're from and so on, we gathered as a group, the 6 of us, back in sort of March, April, May sort of time last year. We're wanting to find out how had children's faith been impacted by the pandemic. And we'd each observed things in our own context, but we wanted to know whether similarities or differences across the different contexts that we're working in. And so in June last year, 2021, we carried out a survey, an online survey, but we also sort of supplemented that with various interviews and other surveys and other research that each of us have done in our different contexts. And so we drew that all together into the report, the multinational report about children's ministry that hopefully you've seen. If you want that later, we'll forward it on in the email after this session. And so we're going to draw upon that in this session, sharing with you various things from it, because quite broadly, it highlighted some significant underlying issues in the way that ministry is operating amongst families across all of our contexts, really. It wasn't limited to any particular setting or country. And so we really wanted to share these observations with you. We know that we have an incredible wealth of skill and knowledge and experience and expertise here. And so we want to capture that, hence why if you're able to participate on Mentimeter, that's great. And we want this session not necessarily to be the answers to all of the world's problems. That would be wonderful, it could be, but we want it to be a springboard so that you can take these observations that we're sharing away and consider how you can implement these in your own setting, in your organisation, in your ministry, in your context. And so we know some people have already been setting up sort of think tanks to happen in the next week or so. So that would be wonderful to hear that. But I think this is hopefully the start of a conversation. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts, but also to highlighting these patterns and trends to help you go off and do your own thinking. But ultimately we see, as you will hear us talking about this, that there are gifts to be seen and had, that God is doing a new thing, and that we can consider developments in our ministries in this time. So I'm going to hand over to Phil to pray for us. But anyway, it's lovely to see all of these countries that you're from. So thank you for that. Hand on to Phil to open in prayer.
Phil, you're muted.
Father, from the beginning of time, you have had families and children on your mind and heart. Jesus himself said, "Let the little children come to me and do not forbid them." Father, we need your presence with us as we seek to find ways of bringing more children into your kingdom. We are asking that your Spirit guide our thinking and conversation to fit your desire for the children of your world. For if we are too busy to invest in the spiritual formation of children, then perhaps we are too busy. Father, children need and deserve the opportunity to hear about Jesus. And we pray in his name and commit this time to you. Amen.
Well, welcome everybody. We're going to start with a question. We want to, so get ready with your Mentimeter questions. In what ways is your ministry or organization involved in ministry among families? So go ahead and type your thoughts into the Mentimeter. In what ways is your ministry or organization involved in ministry among families? And while you're typing that in, I'm going to just talk a little bit about what our desire was for this research, our context for it. We really wanted to come together to help families and churches nurture children's faith formation. And this pandemic, as all of us know, has turned kind of our worlds upside down. And the way we have been used to doing ministry was not the way we could do ministry, depending on your location, depending on quarantine, depending on whether you could meet at church or not meet at church. And so we wanted to see what was going on in our world, what ideas could be sparked from this situation, maybe help us rethink how we did ministry in our particular context. One of the beautiful things as we met and as we talked, Isaiah 43 kept coming up in our conversation. Isaiah 43, 18 to 19 said, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." And one of the things we talked about as a group was maybe this pandemic might be a gift to us, or there are gifts hidden in this pandemic, saying that we believe that God is calling us into new ways of doing life, a new way of doing ministry. Maybe there are new ways we should be exploring, but we just never had the chance to do this. And we can now take a step back and look at things a little bit differently. So as you guys have been answering in the different ways that we're involved in ministry, you can see some of us are involved across our denominations. We are equipping families, we're training our volunteers, we're teaching in Bible clubs, mentoring young families, neighborhood clubs, ministering to families in local contexts, toddler groups. Those are one of my favorite groups, our toddler groups, working with kids and families in our local community, different ways that we are all involved. Messy Church, involved with our pastoral interactions with people. We've been involved in a variety of different ways that we can be together. So what I'm excited about this time is for us to really start saying, well, maybe there might be new ways for us to engage with families, new ways of exploring these ideas, maybe ways that we've done it in the past that either are broken or maybe have run out of steam, and that we can find new ways of doing that. Any more interactions, Sarah, or is that pretty much everybody?
That's great. Yeah, I think we've got such a good spread of experience there. It's exciting, isn't it? All these things. Super. Brilliant.
Yeah, take a look, people, at everybody at what we're doing, the different ways that we're engaging with families. Sarah, I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mimi. So I forgot to say, I'm very sorry. I had a lovely slide earlier of introducing the team. So I'll just whiz back to that there. As a team, we met, as I said, last springtime. And these are all of us who are involved. And Sue unfortunately couldn't be here today, but hopefully we've got a video of her so she can join us remotely later. So just to kind of introduce you then to the research. So we sent out the survey to across the globe really, but we did focus on 4 case study nations that we were each working within. So the UK, the States, Brazil and Canada. And as I said earlier, this included surveys, interviews, observations and various other things. So Val is going to join me, I think, and help me to share with you some of the key findings that that came out of it. So Val, actually, before I put the key findings on, do you want to just explain a little bit about, Mimi's already mentioned this idea of kind of a gift of the pandemic. But do you want to just talk to us a little bit about kind of why we wanted to do that? That would be great.
First of all, I just want to share, I know a lot of you are making comments that we're struggling. We have reached 100 and there's been a limit. We will provide the recording later for those who aren't able to come in. So thank you for the concerns there, and people have been contacting us to come in. We'll share that with them. That's just a little glitch we've had here, but thank you everyone. As far as the presentation, yes, we can share this with you as well. So just overall, what as we gather together, realize here's a chance. When we're taking out of our comfort zone, things come to light. And that's what we really saw, that during the pandemic, things became clearer as to where our struggles were. So it really was a gift, as Mimi has shared, to be able to reevaluate what are we doing right, what are we needing to fix and adjust based on what we're seeing during isolation. So really grateful that Sarah was able to share. She helped really lead all of us in sharing and putting down on paper some thoughts around this, and as we discussed and shared, some of the results were incredible. So Sarah, please share some of the thoughts there that we uncovered as we studied things we probably already knew, but it was just evident and became so clear, and such a gift to be able to have something concrete.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing we wanted to say here is that children's leaders and parachurch organisations, really, we need to see more of a prioritisation of ministry amongst children. And formulation of kind of strategy really of what the purpose is. And what we were seeing was that many, obviously the pandemic was a crazy time, really difficult time. Nobody planned for it, threw everything up in the air, up into chaos. But as we looked across the statistics of various different countries where, you know, in Canada, in the research there, 63% of churches cancelled and suspended Sunday schools, 20% did that in Brazil, 62% decreased what they were doing in the States. In the UK, we didn't particularly have statistics quite the same, but we did hear reports and reports and reports of how there was a decrease in children's work, and people saying some things like, you know, well, it's hard to connect with children in times like this. And we even had some comments. I had to remind the church that we had children in it, and the kids were left behind. So that first point there was kind of really apparent that in a time of crisis, there did seem to be much more of a prioritization towards adults than children, which we as people involved with children's ministry found that very concerning, and actually really highlighted a need for much clearer strategies moving forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Val, do you want to talk about the next point?
We just realized we have to think differently. We have to start working differently. And as we interviewed the churches, schools, and parents, it was clear how parents, we need to build them into that partnership where it's authentic partnership, not a transaction, but really helping not just the church providing resources, but how do we help them in this connection of building the formation of the child together, not just passing the baton, but really working. And parents really felt ill-equipped to lead that piece. So that was one of the pieces recognized, that authentic partnership. What does that look like? We need to rethink that. Yeah.
And then the third point here about kind of thinking about greater relational connection. So, thinking, you know, in the pandemic, it seemed that people were merely catching what did they do pre-pandemic? Let's pop it onto the online platforms. And actually there was a sense that that didn't really work, and there was a need to think in different ways. But also, how can we encourage much more active and interactive participation rather than a kind of a passive way? And the final point, Val?
It just showed clearly our our need to be clearer in our communication, bringing more clarity and purpose, passing the vision of what does children's faith formation look like, and how do we help each other in that process. So so important. I see that someone else will put in the chat here. Authentic partnership, clear communication are key points that we've found in this research.
Right.
So Sarah, is there anything else, or let me know?
Yeah, no, I was just going to pop this slide on for people to give their responses. But while you're typing responses to that, what do you think of those key findings? We're going to watch a contribution from Sue, who couldn't join us, but she particularly has expertise in terms of church, in terms of schools, churches working with schools. And so she's going to share a few of her thoughts on that. So I'll stop the share for now, but keep typing in your comments whilst we watch this contribution from Sue.
Hello, I'm Sue Price, and really delighted to have been part of this multinational research project. And I am co-principal and pastoral outreach coordinator at the Margaret Beaufort Institute of Theology in Cambridge, and we're the Catholic house that's part of the Cambridge Theological Federation. My particular interest in this research was what was happening between schools, families and church, and how this was affecting faith formation for children. And we acknowledge that only 16 schools took part in the research, but that gives us an indication and perhaps some hints about where further work needs to be done and how we can grow this work in the future. What is clear from the research that during the pandemic, the school and church connection on the families had little impact on faith formation. Schools didn't seem to be able to draw on church resources. Churches didn't seem to be able to really easily link in with schools. However, what's a very positive note there is that where it was possible, there were real relationships being formed. Schools beginning to realise that through fostering a relationship with their local church, they could gain support. What was identified was that people felt that actually priests, clergy visiting schools could actually offer support to staff, which was needed, perhaps more than actually worrying about the children at that point. So I think that's something to build on. And I think it's something to look forward to, is how churches can become real resources for schools, no matter where churches and schools are based.
So that gives you a bit of a summary of some of our kind of key findings, and we're going to dig into them a little bit more now. So I'll hand over to Lawson to think about this whole area of vision and strategy looking ahead.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many colleagues and friends, and thank you so much for joining us today. One of the findings that really popped for us was about strategy. In fact, the absence of strategy in children's and family ministry. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at that, and want to ask you that while I'm chatting, that you will look at the Mentimeter question that we've put up there and briefly highlight the importance of vision and strategy and respond to that, please. I want to start by quoting from our research, where we discovered that 97% of respondents indicated that the church should not be the primary lead in the faith nurture of children, but rather their role was to support parents, reinforce parental nurture, and be available for advice if needed. This response is staggering, since it does not seem to portray the contemporary ethos of many churches in the countries being researched. Indeed, in our research, churches communicated that they saw it as their job to disciple children, not parents. When I first read our draft of the report, I underlined for myself 97% of respondents indicating that the church should not be the primary lead in the faith nurture of children. And as I underlined that, I recognize there's a profound disconnect between what churches are doing and what parents want churches to do and what we should be doing. So there's this disconnect. I'm not sure if Sarah's sharing the PowerPoints that we've got there, but I've got a little picture of a disconnect, just to remind us that something is not connecting as it should. So we obviously and urgently need new vision and strategy for children's and faith formation. That's my next picture, Sarah. And the need for this new vision and fresh strategy is highlighted in the fact that most churches, in fact, 99% of the churches in our study, do not have a vision or a written strategy for their children's or family ministry. And I want to stress, particularly, we interested in a written strategy here. There are some who indicated they had strategies that were not written. 99% of us not having written strategies for ministry is alarming. And moving forward, churches and families must work together to develop ministry strategies. If you look at the next slide, we've got a slide there just saying we need to be developing strategy for family ministry. And to do that, we need to be partnering with parents. Now, you may be wondering, why don't we have written strategies of ministry? Well, there were 3 reasons identified in the research, as you can see in this next slide. Number 1, the responses to our questions about strategy revealed a degree of confusion and ambiguity about the concept of strategy. So that was interesting. There's a number of us who don't know or understand what strategy is. Secondly, many respondents perceive the provision of ministry activities or programs in and of themselves to be their strategies. So they thought that what they're doing is in fact the strategy. And thirdly, we discovered that strategies are often determined not by children's or family ministry leaders, but by senior levels of church leadership. And that one in particular was a very important finding because it impacts how we think about this moving forward. Moving forward, if you move to the next slide, thank you. We are very aware of the fact that if we fail to plan, we are planning to fail, as Benjamin Franklin, the founding father of the United States, said. So in the future, we're recognizing that we must do more than pivot, we must innovate, yet innovation in and of itself, we're recognizing will be futile without a strategy. We also recognize that in developing strategies moving forward, we can't remain in isolated pods. We must unify our ministry strategies. And for that to happen, it's going to be essential for us to invite the engagement of Christian schools and seminaries and agency leaders and denominational leaders and church leadership in the development of future strategies. And frankly, this is critical. If the church of tomorrow is going to flourish, the church of today must prioritize children's and family ministry strategies. And this will only happen if we, those of us who are involved in children's and family ministry, raise the profile of children's and family ministry with senior levels of church leadership. And then most importantly, added to that, if we're going to build and sustain momentum, children, youth, and parents must be part of the strategy process. If they're not, there'll be no ownership of the strategies. This to simply make this point before we move on, that the strategies we develop should help us shift from program-driven approaches to person-prioritized approaches, just to link back to what Sarah was saying a little earlier. I want to move us along to continue thinking about strategy. I'm going to ask Mimi and Phil to help us explore this further. And while we chat, we're going to be putting up 3 new questions now on Mentimeter that we'd love for you to respond to. So while those questions are going up, here's a key question. Recognizing that the word strategy, that word strategy, has sometimes been avoided in Christian circles because it seems to be at odds in some people's minds with being God-led or Spirit-inspired. I want to ask Mimi to summarize why biblically and theologically a vision and strategy are vital for the health and growth of children's and family ministry.
Well, I think it's oftentimes we look at ministry with children kind of as a lesser than ministry. Oh, we're just having the kids together, or they can play, or the real work is done with adults. But we know that children are full image bearers of God, and that ministry with them is important. It shocked me in the research that 99% do not have a written strategy for ministry with children. That's like going on a trip and having no plans, right? No idea of where you're going, where you're going to stay, or what you're going to do. But a vision and strategy, it lays a foundation for your work. Otherwise, you're just going from one idea to another. And without that type of leadership, without that type of foundation, there is chaos. And not that your ideas are bad ideas, but you want a vision and strategy to guide your work. What's your ultimate purpose? Why is it that you do what you do? And that guides then your strategy for accomplishing it. So a vision and strategy is just essential. And we see that through the biblical story, right? We see that God has provided leaders throughout the history to have vision, to have strategy, to have this kind of foundational work as they did the work of God. And so why would we not be doing that with children as well?
Wonderful. Thanks, Mimi. So I'm wondering, so we've got this thinking about strategy, but are there good examples of success stories of denominations and churches and organizations, schools, maybe even families that have developed children's or family ministry strategies that are appropriate and applicable for ministry both now during the pandemic and post-pandemic? Phil, your thoughts on that?
Well, Lawson, when we go through the report, we didn't find any success stories, either from denominations or churches or organizations that were at work developing new children's or family ministry strategies to get them through these last couple of years. So that doesn't mean there haven't been any, and there aren't any out there, but no one reported it as part of their replies, their responses. Now, we know we need to make changes, but we also have to think and consider about some innovative approaches to children's ministry. So if we're going to make a difference in the future, we do need to do some strategic thinking, as a result, develop a strategic direction for the future. We know the why. As children's ministry leaders, we know why we do what we do. What we need to focus on is the what and the how. One of the things we'd like to suggest as a team is that we form local and or regional groups to get as many thoughts together as possible. And each region, each group could collaborate to define the what and the how for their area. For Canada, I can't speak for the other individuals that are here, part of the team, but Lawson and I would welcome the opportunity to work from people in Canada to develop a strategy moving forward. And you can contact us, Lawson through Scripture Union Canada and myself through BCM International Canada. And I know the others that are online would love to participate in that. And so you could write to Sarah Holmes and get the contact information.
Tremendous thanks, Phil. We obviously need to desperately prioritize the development of strategies for children's and family ministry. But we're going to hand back to Sarah now to continue on.
Great, thanks. Now it's, I don't know if it's a bit depressing seeing how many barriers people are listing here on the screen, but really thanks for sharing those. It's important to be aware of them. And so as we look through and see, as I'm sure you're familiar, the bigger the word, then it's been mentioned many times, and we see this thing of lack of vision, no training, lack of understanding, lack of capacity, leadership, church leaders, so a whole host of things. And these are behind each one of these things there is a story, isn't there? And that there are many stories, and I think this is something that we as as people, and I say this collectively to everybody on this call, those of us who care about children and family ministry, we need to really be looking at these barriers to see how we can, in our own settings and our own ways, overcome and work against some of these barriers, really. So that's really helpful. Thanks for sharing those. I should say these things that you're typing in, we'll email these all around as well. And this next question then, bouncing off what Lawson and Phil were talking there, where do you need to begin? And some of you have already been typing in here. What do you require to develop a new children and family ministry? Lawson, do you want to comment on any of these, or should we just have a look through the various thoughts about needing families to be part of the parish?
No, just to say this, your input, everyone, would be wonderfully helpful on this. We did a research piece in Scripture Union Canada back 3 years ago, and we discovered with the contributing churches to that research that one of the things that people would appreciate would be a model or means that would help us develop strategies. So while you're filling in and answering this question, if you go to the Scripture Union Canada site, you'll be able to find on that site for free under resources how to develop a strategy of children's or family ministry. So we'll just add that in, but thank you for adding in all sorts of thoughts here.
Great, thanks. Okay, so moving on now and this is the next question as well. How could you more intentionally and more strategically involve children and families in that strategy and in your work that you're doing? And I think this is a really big question, big thing that was raised as a real need. So fascinating to see these things. I'll leave that up for a moment in case people want to add to that. In a moment, we'll be talking about success stories. So some of these things perhaps could feed into that. Things about talking together, suggestion boxes, surveying families. So even just those three I've read, they're listening, aren't they? They're hearing what children and families are wanting and needing, opportunities to come together, listening, discussing, talking, which is really, really interesting and bounces really well onto the next point that we're going to talk about. So I'll just move the slide on, but feel free to keep typing things in. You should be able to move around the slides in your Mentimeter. Because I was just going to talk for a few moments about some of the disconnections that we spotted in the findings of this survey, and it was really really kind of fascinating to see, fascinating and a little bit depressing, if I'm honest. So here we see the disconnect between, this was the biggest, I think already, perhaps a couple of presenters have already mentioned this disconnect between institutions of the school, church and home. It was rare to read about any kind of collaboration or partnership. We looked at the language that people were talking about, and it very much seemed to be talking about using the church as a service provider. You know, how can we utilize the church? What can we get from the church? That sort of idea. Very, very few people talking about working together or in partnership to support a child's faith. And some of these comments here. The church did not meet our needs during the pandemic. We engaged with the services as much as we could. They should have catered more for children. So very much this sense of what can we get from the church was really quite very, very strongly came through. And also this point here at the bottom is the aim, content or connection. And this was a very strong thing that was coming through to us, because there seemed to be the sense that churches were providing a lot of content maybe for families. Here's a website, here's a book, here's this, that and the other, lots of content. But actually what families were wanting was connection. And the same with schools. Perhaps we heard many stories about how churches are providing content to schools in some of the countries where it was possible for schools to have input from churches. There were assemblies provided or RE lessons, things like that. Here are some lessons, here are some lessons. Download these off YouTube or whatever, but not very much connection going on. And yet that was what people were wanting in the schools. And so again, we'll talk later about some success stories, but where we heard of those times where actually people were going and making connections with school staff and in a kind of mentoring type pastoral support role, that was actually really, really effective. And another disconnection we spotted was with families. So 66% of the families who participated in our survey reported that they felt withdrawn or disconnected from church during the pandemic, which is staggering when you consider that probably the people who completed our survey were those who were generally more connected with church in normal times. And yet there was another kind of dichotomy and disconnection. Many people saying it's easier to connect with adults than children. And this was kind of perhaps the argument for why children's ministry wasn't quite so prevalent during the pandemic. It's easier to minister with adults. And yet, many also said, we can't connect with children because their parents are too busy to log them onto the computer or this kind of thing. So there was a sense that adults are easier to connect with, but then the sense that adults are stopping us connecting with children. And so it's just a little bit of something to unpick there, I think. What's going on behind some of those statements. Disconnections in terms of the support. So fascinating this, 48% said that the main source of support was family and Christian friends. So that sense of informal support structures. But only 18% of those who responded said that church was their main source of support, and 8% school. And this was really interesting for us to see, because as it says there at the bottom, when we looked at what churches were saying, they were saying that their main aim during the pandemic was to provide support for families. So it's fascinating to see there that many churches are putting hours and hours and hours into activities, and by activities, I mean their own activity, time to support families, and yet it perhaps wasn't translating through that families felt supported. So I think we really need to be, as you were saying on the previous Mentimeter question, listening to families. What does support look like for them? What do they want and need, and so on. In terms of faith in the home, there was another disconnection here. 32% said that their family's spiritual activity had decreased during the pandemic. 25% said it had increased. 17% reported their faith had been enriched, and 10% had reported increased discipleship. So although we have seen at the top there 32% of their family's faith has decreased, we are also seeing some significant and encouraging statistics there that actually there is positive news, that actually there is more faith going on at home. And so some of the quotes at the bottom there, that families were reporting more intentional children's worship at home, faith has become part of everyday life, and more spiritual conversations happening at home. So these things are really exciting, that, perhaps we need to, again, be unpicking and thinking, right, this is going on. This is a gift of the pandemic. How can we build on this in the ministries that we're doing and that we're involved in? What do churches think parents want? We asked this, and you'll see here that various things, and the bottom one, 26% thought that parents wanted support in children's faith development in the home. However, when we asked what they were doing to do that, there was very little that we could see actually happening. So although that perhaps 26% thought that was what parents wanted, didn't necessarily translate to what was actually going on. And here, another disconnection that we kind of spotted when we asked what parents do want, the vast majority wanted support or reinforcement in what they were doing in terms of faith in the home. You see here only 1.2% talked about wanting the church to have complete responsibility for that. So we kind of need to see this and to see that parents are wanting to have support. They're not wanting the church to take over. And yet we read here, there's a statistic from Barna. In other places, we hear that churches are perhaps assuming that their primary role is to actually take over and support children's faith. So there's a little summary of the disconnections that we saw. Churches identified that parents wanted support. Parents said they did want support, yet many parents relying on the church and many feeling ill-equipped and disempowered. And we really think that that's because of these underlying messages that are going on there. You've already been typing there, so this is brilliant, thank you. What do you think of these disconnections? And we're going to really scrutinize these and look at them in depth later. So do feel free to keep typing these as we move on in a moment. But just some things I see there, very worrying during COVID. Families are very disconnected. This major struggle, marginal church families. It really rings true. So fascinating here to read this. Alarming but not surprising. I think that was our feeling as well as a research team. It highlights the church isn't very good at understanding the needs of the people ministering to. Yeah. So do feel free to keep typing, but I'm going to hand over to Mimi for our next segment. I'll just stop the screen share for now, but do keep typing.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for that. The highlight I think that I saw was this: there's not much language between collaboration and partnership. And although I want to hear from all of you, because I think there are ways that we have had some successes or some good examples of being strategic or intentional, working in partnership with parents and families. So there is a Mentimeter question that you can answer, is how can organizations more effectively equip and empower parents and work in partnership with them? Or what are some of the barriers or issues with this? So go ahead and start typing your answers to this while I start talking with Val and Sarah. So my question for them is, can you share some creative ways we've seen the church partner with parents? Is there some success stories out there? Val, do you want to share with us?
Yeah, let me just first preface that I did a research in Brazil right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it alarmed me to the point where I said, okay, in my ministry that I walk with 20 individuals, let me pick on 5 and journey with them as we understand what's going on in the pandemic. So I journeyed with 5 key leaders. And so these are not all worked, but 3 of the 5 have made huge progress in the partnership with families. So I want to bring that 3 quick stories. One leader focused on the opportunities of making fun moments and creative moments for parents to take a smaller step versus saying, I'm responsible for the spiritual formation. How did they do smaller steps? So they did fun things such as when we were still isolated, not able to meet together, they did a week where every day they would give a special kit to the parents, and in the cars they came to a service and parents had next steps of how to encourage, how to build that particular spiritual formation. And then after they opened, they did a picnic as a whole family, integrating not only the children but the adults, the adolescents. And so that was interesting to see how they partnered, helping parents come alongside what they were trying to do at home. The second one, she said, you know what, I can't build into every family, and I know parents are struggling, I'm going to pick 5 families to coach and come alongside and say, how do you want to see formation grow in your family? And she walked on a weekly basis with them, and they created a vision for their family and spiritual formation on how they would walk and create. They actually each presented their own strategy and plan. And as she walked with them, they at the end presented something in print that they were able to put in their house. One did a mug with the key vision and strategies for their family as where they wanted to grow. And another one did a big poster and they have it framed. So each individual did things differently. And the third church, what intrigued me is they had already started the process and hired somebody. This is interesting. They hired somebody not to be responsible for a ministry, but the integration of all the generations. He was a pastor for family, and he was now hired to help integrate between children, preteens, teens, youth, all the way up to families. And so it was interesting how they started communicating even within the church differently. And during the pandemic, one thing that they did is, you know what, instead of us giving resources, let's give them the challenge for them to build the resources. And so what excited me at Christmas, at the Advent, instead of saying, here's an Advent for you to do with your children to celebrate who Jesus is, here's some objectives that you should do. Create your own Advent. Help your children through the process to really know who is Jesus in your life and who is Jesus in your life as a family. And I was shocked and cried with her as she shared pictures and testimonies of more than 100 families sharing different ways they did it and how they just followed the objectives instead of giving the final work. They gave the objectives, and each one did it in a different way and creative. So it was very encouraging to see that.
So this is fascinating to me. When I'm thinking about how does this change the way we do ministry, I heard some things come up in what you were saying. You know, there was a personal touch. So oftentimes, and I worked in a large church, right? You programatized it. So it, you know, systems, right? But this seems to be more personal, more relational, more integrated with other things that were going on. And you said something very fascinating at the end where you said you didn't give them the resources, or the church didn't give them the resources. They kind of challenged the families to create their own. So how does this change the way we do ministry? What are your thoughts on that?
To me, I realized it's more of a journey. Just as I invested in those 3 to 5 leaders and helped them on the journey, I also evaluated at the end of the year my other 15 that I didn't evaluate or didn't walk on the journey. I noticed how much further they weren't as far in their journey on that piece. And so it is a personal touch. It's the need to stop and go, there's no way for us to investing and to keep thinking big as an event or as training, but how do we equip, disciple key leaders who are going to help multiply this with others? I think that is key, is recognizing we're no longer we need to stop thinking as an event and a training, and how do we build into key leaders are going to build into others. To me, that's one of the biggest pieces that I came away with. It's back to, it's not a transaction. It's not about a service we provide, but it's about connecting, helping them on the journey and saying, I cannot help others, but I can help them on that journey and hopefully challenge them to multiply that as well.
But that's a key thing that really jumps out to me, what you said. It's not a transaction, but a connection. It's back to that relational approach to ministry. And how do we connect with our, you know, investing in families, investing in our leaders who then invest in others and multiply that way. But like you said, you're going to focus on some, you're not going to focus on all. And that's a hard balance to keep going. And especially in the United States churches, where often success is measured by numbers. So that'll push on that a little bit. One last question. Can you name a key idea or a way for a church to utilize building partnerships with families? What's one thing you can say to us?
A concept that became clear in this last year is, instead of a program and making sure I have my Sunday in order, is what do I want at the end of the day? If I were to make a survey and say, what do I want? What do I need to see growth in my children? I think the church can play a role in building strategies and plans as to how do we see true signs that the child is growing in their love for God? How do we see signs clearly that they're loving their neighbor as themselves? And so if we make it clear as to create objectives, we can communicate and walk and bring along in the journey on here's our objectives. And just like in a school, you have parent-teacher conference. How come we don't have that in with the children in their spiritual formation of saying, here's where they were at the beginning of the school year, at the beginning of the year, and here's where they're at now. Doing a one-on-one journey of clearly stating as a church, I want to see them growing with the Lord. How is that? One is seeing them strengthen in their prayer, in their, whether it's that, or whether it's, I see them reading more and desiring more to read or memorize scripture, documenting those, and then taking steps and campaign for the year. Not only saying it in our head and creating the strategy, but then building it together and communicating and saying to the parents, help us on this journey. How do you see this happening? Where do you see your strength? So that it's a joint effort. To me, it's recognizing that it's true partnership. It's not a passing of service. And when we create the objectives of the church, I think the parents will have a clarity and not ambiguity as to where to go. And it's going to challenge their faith as well to see where do they stand and how can they pass something on if they haven't had it themselves. So to me, that's the biggest piece that I see is the church can bring clarity on objectives so that parents know where to go from that. And it'd be challenging for the parents to see where they're at on that journey as well.
And I often think in this family concept, everybody's growing, not just the kids, right? So it's a family faith formation that's growing. Thanks for putting the Mentimeter up. You can see some of the ideas that other people have shared. Thank you guys for sharing this, creating platform for conversations. That's back to that listening concept. I think oftentimes we may think we know what people want, but it's important for us to listen to that. Parents are busy and tired, so how do we fit into their lifestyle, listening to what they need versus us giving it? Build relationships and trust first. That's huge with families and how you do that. People using, let parents meet and share ideas, experiences, prayers. I think some of the best learning is what we're doing right now, where I'm learning from all of you, not just with my ideas, but what everybody's doing. So the same thing in our churches. How do we learn from families, what they're doing, what's successful? Whole church must embrace the vision of family support and empowerment. Intergenerational church, we've heard that theme very quietly spoken throughout today. How often the generations coming together has been important for the formation of families. Then help parents see that they have some skills to develop faith at home. I loved how Val, you named different ways, setting objectives as families, kind of saying this is what we're going to do as a family. Organizations have specific opportunities for parents and kids to talk together. It takes planning, time, and money. It takes intentionality. So there's more here that we're listing. I don't want to go over my time too much, so I'm going to turn it over to Val for you to take the next step.
I love the comments being put on here. I learned a lot with Dave and Dave Cisnos and the importance of listening and really seeing where is the theology, where are the kids, and how to come alongside. And I think we need to do that with the parents as well. And what challenged me this season is I looked at the story of the Promised Land and how it was clear they did an evaluation of the land before they went in, and they said, no, it's not possible. But 2 said, no, it is possible. And in the end, Jacob and Caleb understood clearly no one was going to go in there with them. They were going to be going on their own. Only the kids were going to go with them. So I might imagine the strategy. Did they just work with the kids, or did they work with the whole family to figure out, you already know you're not going in, so how do we prepare your kids for the battle that's coming ahead? And their strategy changed for those 40 years of preparing those kids for that battle that they were going to go into the Promised Land. And that's what we have now. The statistics and what we've seen is not negative. It's this opportunity for us to prepare and be ready for battle, to go where God's called us. So Lawson, I know you have some strategies and some thoughts behind that. So I want to pass that on to you so that we can encourage and build each other up here.
Great, thanks, Val. And thanks everyone for contributing in the Mentimeter. Please keep doing so. We're putting another question up now. As we now move to what's probably uppermost in your minds, how do I develop a new plan for children's and family ministry. What's next? We've had this research, we've all had our observations through COVID-19. And interestingly, as we finished putting our research report together, one of the first questions that was asked of the report itself was by Phil, when Phil contacted the rest of us and said, so how does this work out practically? How can we encourage and inspire the global church to focus more intentionally on children's and family ministry? And so we got talking about that, and Phil's going to give us a bit of a response there. We need your sound on, please, Phil.
As you answer that Mentimeter question, we just want to go through some of the challenges and issues. Before we can find a solution, we've got to understand what the challenges or the issues are that will cause us difficulties in developing a new plan. And of course, one that's been mentioned 2 or 3 times today is that children's and family ministry aren't as prioritized as highly as adult ministry. And that has to be changed. We have to have a different approach. Families, churches, and schools aren't collaborating in children's faith formation. And that's particularly, of course, effective here in Canada, where we can't get into the schools and we cannot teach Bible in our schools. So we have to work with just families and churches. We have to get away from a content or program-driven approach that predominates right now. And we've got to get to more of a relational one, more of a relational approach. Let's move on, Sarah, if we can. We have to get, so many of our tools that we have aren't flexible to meet unusual situations. And so we have to somehow develop more resources and tools that will fit the variety of situations we find ourselves. Yeah, a big one, of course, is parents aren't taking the lead role. And I think what it is they just don't know how. This hasn't been prioritized. And so they don't know how to take the lead role in their children's faith formation. And so they feel ill-equipped to nurture their children. And I think there's a certain amount of fear to that. And so the next challenge then is to training and equipping parents to be that primary source of their children's spiritual formation. And that's a challenge because we have to get accustomed to it ourselves. We have to do the research. We have to look for the material and make it a priority of us who work with children to help to equip and train parents. Then the next few slides that were challenges and issues we've got. If we can, some have mentioned on the chat the intergenerational connections, and they're limited, but we need to expand that more. We have to make that much more effective. We have to let children become actively involved in ministry in our churches. Too often, they warm the pew, they warm the chair. They need to be actively involved. And then to go back to some slides, we need written strategies for children's and family ministries. They're just mainly non-existent right now. So if we don't know where we're going to get there every time. And we need to recognize that research in and of itself will not help solve these challenges and issues. It's what we do with the research. That is, we know the why, but we need together to determine what and how. How can children's ministry be restructured and or redesigned to focus on the faith formation of children? And what can we do as children's ministry leaders to make a difference? How can we be more effective advocates for children's ministry? Lawson?
Thanks, Phil. So just to add to that and to restate, what could or should be the next steps. Sarah, if you'll bring up the next slide, please. Here's what we've also been thinking, that in some way, shape, and form, we need to be training all pastors because they are the primary decision makers in children's and family ministry. What would that look like in our seminaries and Bible colleges? What would that look like denominationally? That question needs to be asked and answered. We need to be fostering partnerships amongst people in our own networks and beyond those networks. And as we mentioned right at the beginning of this time together, we're hoping that we will get together in all sorts of ways following this to talk more about this. We need to be less transactional and more relational. That theme has been coming through again and again, that we have to put a face on ministry. We've got to come close together. We've got to recognize that we're better together. We've got to redesign resources and tools to be more transferable. There may be future pandemics and things that come into our world, and we shouldn't be caught napping next time round. So we've got to think all of that through. We need to champion parents as children's primary faith nurturers, and we could talk for hours on end about that one. Moving on, please, Sarah. We need to cultivate parents' confidence. Phil mentioned that. We need to provide practical training for parents. One of the findings in our research was that very little training has been done through this season, and we need to ramp that right up, both online and in-person training where possible. We've spoken about, just briefly, Mimi mentioned it, encourage the development of intergenerational connections. We need to be involving children within the whole process and within ministry itself, far more so than we have done in the past. And we need to teach stakeholders how to develop a strategy. We need to be our own best PR, if you like, to help the church move forward. So that's just a few thoughts there. Thank you. I see a whole number of comments coming up in the Mentimeter questions. If you want to think a little bit more about this subject, you may want to go to the blog Children's Ministry Basics. I'll type it in the chat room just now. You can get that at childrensministrybasics.com, and we've spoken about what it means to develop a plan in one of the blog posts there. So over to Val, please.
I just want to close our time in prayer, and I'm excited. I love the challenge of thinking differently and the comments being made. And Jessica, you're so right. It is about partnership. It's not one or the other. It requires the church and the family together. Just as in the Promised Land, Jacob was responsible for leading them, but in the end, it took the entire nation together in preparing and partnering, and we need to do that as well. So let's just pray for God to continue giving us wisdom on what we've learned here and how we can best now partner and find a way to strategically reach the children in this new season that we're embarking on. So Father, I just want to come before you and thank you so much how you have given us this gift to see things in a different light, to reevaluate and go, hey, we need to start thinking differently. We need to start acting differently. Give us the strategies, give us the people around us to continue challenging our thinking, to grow, to understand how you designed us to be in community, to truly help one another on this journey, knowing it's a journey of partnering in our understanding of who you are and our role in the kingdom. So continue to guide us through that. In Jesus' name, I pray, amen. I want to pass it over to Sarah for last comments, and we have a video for you at some point.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. In a moment, Sue's going to wrap up the final thoughts. But apologies again about the limit on participants. We thought we'd increase that so that everybody could join, especially on a Zoom like this, that we wanted to kind of encourage collaboration more widely. That's a shame, but we have recorded and we will share the video out, and all of these Mentimeter comments, we'll share those out as well. But as has been mentioned, we want this to be springboarding conversations. So do get in touch if you, we do have like 300 people who want to be part of this conversation. So if you want to, start conversations on some of these sub-themes, we'd like to kind of share those ideas out and perhaps get some kind of sub-teams, sub-conversations going. So do get in touch if, sorry, some of these things have touched you particularly. So I'll hand on to Val's just going to play us Sue's video about closing comments, but also the final slide on Mentimeter. If you want to share any resources or ideas with others, then feel free to share those in these final few moments. But let's just have Sue do our concluding comments.
It is my delight to be able to draw this evening's meeting to a close, even though I'm having to do that in a pre-recorded message due to a prior commitment. But first of all, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for taking part in a really extraordinary gathering together, which I think is a really important sign of the Holy Spirit. I'd like to share with you this verse from Isaiah 42. I will make the blind walk along the road and lead them along paths. I will turn darkness into light before them and rocky places into level tracks. I think at this stage of the pandemic journey, we are being led along paths. We are beginning to emerge out of the darkness into the light. And I think, and I hope you appreciate that this report is one of the gifts that we have been able to receive out of the work that's gone on during the pandemic. This report as a gift needs further unpacking, and that's the exciting part for us to do now. That is part of the ongoing journey. Who knows where we may end up? But perhaps part of that gift is to think about how this can be a way of shifting the paradigms that we're now currently working in. Through unwrapping, exploring, playing with the gift that this report is, may we see a different way of working in the future. So again, a very big thank you for being with us. A very huge thank you to Sarah, who has coordinated this whole project, along with Mimi, Val, Lawson and Phil. It has been a real delight to be a project team with all of you. And I thank you for the work that is now going to emerge.
Super. So thanks for joining us. Feel free to go and enjoy the rest of your day and also share some resources as you leave. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.